The dog kept returning to the frozen lake for 17 days, always at the same time, always taking the same narrow path through the snow, and always stopping at the exact same place near the ice. Nobody knew why. The farmer who lived nearby first noticed him on a freezing morning when the entire lake looked like a sheet of white glass. The dog was thin, dirty, and exhausted, with matted brown and white fur, floppy ears, tired dark eyes, and a small scar above his left eye. He looked like a dog that had spent a long time surviving on his own. The farmer called out, "Hey, buddy!" But the dog only looked back for a moment before turning toward the lake. He walked several feet along the shoreline, stopped, stared at one particular patch of ice, and then walked away. The next morning, he came back, and the morning after that. For 17 days, the same thing happened. Even when the snow became deeper and the wind became stronger, the dog returned. The farmer began wondering if the dog was grieving someone he had lost. Maybe his owner had disappeared near the lake. Maybe another animal had died there. Or maybe the dog simply couldn't let go of something he remembered. On the 9th day, the farmer watched him with binoculars and noticed the dog wasn't looking randomly at the ice. He always focused on the same spot. On the 13th day, the dog began scratching at the snow near the shoreline and pressing his nose against the ice. He made a quiet whining sound. The farmer's heart sank. There was something down there. On the 14th morning, the farmer finally followed him. The dog walked to the same spot and looked back at the farmer as if asking him to come closer. Then he scratched at the snow again. The farmer crouched down and looked through the ice. At first he saw nothing but white and blue. Then he noticed a tiny dark shape beneath the frozen surface. His heart stopped. It was a kitten. A tiny gray and white kitten was trapped in a shallow pocket beneath the ice near the shoreline. She was alive but barely moving. The farmer suddenly understood why the dog had been coming back every day. This stray dog had been returning to check on a tiny animal that wasn't even his own. For 14 days, he had refused to forget her. The farmer stood up and said, "Oh, buddy." The dog stared at him and began whining again. The farmer knew they had no time to waste. He ran back to the barn, grabbed a shovel, thick rope, warm blankets, and a long wooden board, then hurried back to the lake. The dog was still waiting. The farmer carefully tested the ice, but it cracked beneath the shovel. He knew it was dangerous. He secured the rope around himself and slowly crawled along the thickest ice near the shoreline. The dog tried to follow him, but the farmer called out, "Stay back." The dog stopped. The farmer reached the frozen pocket and carefully began breaking away the thin ice around the kitten. The kitten made a tiny cry. The dog became restless, pacing along the shore. The farmer worked faster. "I've got you," he said. Another piece of ice broke away. The kitten moved weakly. The farmer reached down, gently grabbed her, and pulled her free. She was freezing cold, soaked, and barely moving. He immediately wrapped her in a thick blanket. The dog ran toward them and gently sniffed the kitten. The kitten slowly opened her eyes and gave a tiny meow. The dog froze for a moment, then his tail moved once, then again. He gently touched his nose to the kitten's head. After 17 days of returning to the lake, the dog finally had what he had been waiting for. The kitten was safe. The farmer carried her back toward the barn, and the dog followed every step of the way. Inside the warm barn, the farmer placed the kitten near a heater, wrapped her in more blankets, and prepared food. The dog sat beside her and refused to move. The farmer said, "Come on, buddy, let her rest." The dog looked at him, then looked back at the kitten. He stayed. The farmer smiled and said, "Okay, you can stay." That night, the dog curled up beside the kitten, and the kitten slept against his chest. For the first time in weeks, both animals were warm. The next morning, the farmer expected the dog to leave, but he didn't. The kitten woke up, looked around, and crawled toward the dog. The dog lowered his head, and the kitten climbed onto his front paws. He didn't move. He simply watched her. The farmer realized that the dog hadn't been returning to the lake because he was obsessed with the ice. He had been returning because someone was waiting for him. Maybe he had heard the kitten crying long before the farmer noticed her. Maybe he had tried to rescue her himself. Maybe he simply knew she was helpless and couldn't leave her behind. Whatever the reason, their bond was already there. Days passed, and the kitten became stronger. She began walking, then running, then playing. And everywhere she went, the dog followed. If she climbed onto a box, he watched. If she wandered outside, he stayed nearby. If she fell asleep, he curled beside her. The farmer decided to call the dog Buddy and the kitten Luna. Buddy and Luna were completely different. One had survived the streets, while the other had nearly disappeared beneath the ice, but somehow they had found each other. Luna refused to sleep anywhere except beside Buddy. If he moved to another part of the barn, she followed. If Buddy went outside, Luna waited at the door. If she couldn't find him, she cried until he came back. The farmer laughed and said, "You two are inseparable." One afternoon, the farmer opened the barn door and Buddy walked outside. Luna followed. They walked across the snow together until they reached a place where the frozen lake was visible in the distance. Buddy stopped and looked toward the ice. For a moment, he stood completely still. The farmer wondered if Buddy would return to the lake again, but this time something was different. Buddy looked at the lake, then looked at Luna. He turned around and walked home. The farmer's eyes filled with tears. For 17 days, the lake had been the place Buddy returned to because he believed Luna was still trapped there. Now Luna was safe, and Buddy didn't need to go back. That evening, the farmer sat on the barn floor. Buddy rested his head on his knee, and Luna climbed into his lap. The farmer looked at both animals and said, "I think you guys found your home." From that day forward, Buddy and Luna stayed together. The farmer officially adopted them both. Buddy slowly gained weight. His fur became clean and soft, and his eyes became brighter. He stopped looking like a frightened stray. Luna grew into a playful little cat. She loved climbing onto Buddy's back, chasing his tail, and sleeping beside him. And Buddy never seemed to mind. Months later, the farmer took a picture of them sitting together near the same lake. The ice had melted, the grass had returned, and the place that once held fear had become a place of peace. Buddy sat beside Luna while she leaned against him. The farmer looked at the picture and thought about those 17 mornings. 17 times the dog had returned. 17 times he had walked to the same place. 17 times he had refused to forget. And now he finally understood why. Buddy hadn't been waiting for a miracle. He had been trying to make one happen. He had found a helpless animal. And instead of walking away, he stayed. Sometimes love doesn't look like a grand gesture. Sometimes it's simply returning again and again, even when nobody understands why, even when you're tired, and even when you're afraid. Buddy returned for 17 days because Luna needed someone, and when the farmer finally discovered her, the rescue didn't end the story. It created a family. The stray dog who had once been alone now had a home. The kitten who had almost disappeared beneath the ice now had a protector. And the farmer who thought he was rescuing one animal ended up saving two. But perhaps the most beautiful part was this. Buddy didn't rescue Luna because he expected anything in return. He rescued her because he couldn't leave her behind, and Luna never forgot it. Years later, whenever Buddy walked toward the barn, Luna would still follow. Whenever Luna curled up to sleep, Buddy would still lie beside her. And whenever they passed the old lake, Buddy would pause for just a moment, then keep walking because the place where he once searched for someone to save had become the place where he found his family.
He went back for her for 17 days and found a family.